There are no long-term fentanyl users because they die.
Well, yeah, $100 ticket and the possibility of bodily harm?
Yeah.
No way. I wouldn't do it.
And we don't want to put you in jail. There's really no benefit to putting somebody who's on drugs in jail. I mean, as you know, there's a fair amount of drug use in jail.
Yeah, I had quite the operation going in there.
So,
thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Cops and Convicts. This episode, my partner and co-host Rodney is not able to be here, and we are not golfing. However, we are here at Creekside Golf Course in the Augusta room up at the restaurant. And so again, huge thanks to Creekside Golf Club for allowing us to do this and continuing to sponsor what it is that we're doing. And again, also thank you to Rain Sweater, also another sponsor. Don't need to wear the sweater because we are indoors today. However, I was out here on Sunday after church and it was pouring, and I had my rain gear on with my sweater and I was dry. The people I was golfing with, however, were not. And so after 6 holes, they wanted to leave because they were drenched and I was not. So again, there will be a link in the bio on how to order a rain sweater if you're interested, with a code to get percentage off. So again, thank you to Rain Sweater and Creekside Golf Club for allowing us to do this. And today, I'm super thankful to have you, Senator Tim Knopp, out here and willing to do this and come on here. It's just a little bit different because again, we're typically out there playing golf, but time and everything you got going on at the Capitol right now does not permit that. So thank you for agreeing to come out here, and want to introduce you to our viewers and start off with, tell me a little bit about your career.
yeah, well, thank you. It's great to be with you. And I started in politics in the early 90s as a grassroots person, precinct committee person is what they call them, in Deschutes County. And I ended up running for state rep and serving 3 terms in the Oregon House, and took an 8-year break after I was the majority leader in my last term in the House, and I thought I was done. And some folks encouraged me to come back, and including my older kids at the time. And so I ran again in 2012 for the Senate and won, and have served the last 12 years. And this year will be my last year in the Oregon Senate. So I've spent 18 years in service to my district, which includes Bend, City of Redmond, Tumalo, Eagle Crest, and Sisters, and Black Butte.
Awesome, very beautiful country. I love going over there with the company that I work for, Ideal Option. I have treatment clinics over there, and so I get to go over there a lot and enjoy every bit of it. Well, thank you for giving us a little bit of history as you have served, our state, really not just your county, right? Because when you start looking at politics and the things that go on within politics, you guys are a part of, passing bills and producing different bills and all of those things that ultimately affect the entire state. And so you represent your district, your area, but at the end of the day, what you guys do affects people throughout all 36 counties across the state of Oregon. And, over the last few years that I've known you, Oregon has definitely been a part of, I don't know if it's just a grand experiment or what, but we have, went through COVID, where you guys had to, come up with a lot of different things and ways about making sure that people, were taken care of, which, I think you guys did a great job doing so. And then, we also had Measure 110, which we had an episode with Ron Williams, who did a lot to get Measure 110 and the information around Measure 110 out there after the ballot measure was passed, right? Voted on by the people. What do you see, and I understand that this is, you're wrapping up the end of your time, but what do you see as the future when it comes to Measure 110?
Well, as you know, House Bill 4002, and then essentially the money bill, as it were, that provided the $200+ million. Those changed Measure 110 substantially. And Measure 110 would not have passed if the voters knew what it was actually going to do. Because it was sold to voters as your friends and family are going to get drug treatment. But what they never talked about is that personal possession of very hard drugs was going to be legal. That was really not talked about. That was kind of pushed into the background. And there was nobody on the opposing side, which was mainly law enforcement, who was saying, time out, this is going to be a serious problem. And they didn't have a big enough voice, and they were certainly outspent by the other side, the pro side. And so the people of Oregon buy into it. Not by a lot, but by enough to pass it. And a lot of counties didn't pass it, but enough of them did. And so we were, you said that it was an experiment. Oregon was on a really bad trip, as long as we're talking drugs. It was bad.
Yes.
What Oregonians saw was open air drug markets, open use of drugs, more drugs and homelessness out in the open, on the sidewalk, kind of in their face. And then the really bad deal was they saw a massive increase by 1,000+% of overdose deaths from opioids, mostly fentanyl.
Yeah.
And as that started to ramp up over that 3-year experiment, as it will, that really changed the minds of Oregonians. And essentially, over that 3 years, slowly flipped the electorate to saying, we don't want this. Like buyer's remorse, we don't want it. It's not doing what you said it was going to do. And there were a lot of comparisons to like Portugal and other places who have some sort of a legalized system of drugs. But the key difference is that they, the comparison countries had treatment on demand.
Yes.
And we're not even close to that. We're treatment sometime down the road. You're not going to get into a program for weeks or months. I know somebody who had a relative, a sibling, who was suicidal and wanted to get into a program. The drug that they were using, dangerous. And I remember this person telling me they're going to kill themselves if they don't get into a treatment program. And sure enough, probably 6 to 8 weeks later, they did kill themselves. And, that's the tragedy out of this whole thing is we were never set up to have treatment on demand. Now, I would argue that even if you have treatment on demand, it's not likely going to still work very well, because the whole idea behind the legalization of drugs is it's just another choice, and it's okay. Well, it's not okay, because it does all kinds of damage to that individual, to their family, to their kids, and to the community. And you can say, well, personal use is, it's just a choice and it's not hurting anybody. But it does. It does hurt people. It's so damaging. And we should never just sit back and go, oh, well, that's okay. And, what did we see during this 3-year experiment? We saw kids, little kids, toddlers, babies, dying of fentanyl exposure. And they found kids that were at home essentially alone because their parents had OD'd. And they're just there by themselves after their parents have been deceased from drug use. How's that okay? How is that not damaging? Of course it is, right?
Absolutely.
And so the legislature in this year, earlier this year, back in early spring, said, we've heard Oregonians, and we have to make some changes. So we, instead of the decriminalization that happened through the ballot measure, we did some recriminalization of these hard drugs and created a pathway for people to get help, to get a deferral, as it were, and get drug treatment. And so we also, at the same time, invested a substantial amount of money in behavioral mental health and infrastructure to build this up for people to be able to get the kind of treatment that was talked about in Measure 110. And I think you will see modifications of Measure 110 pretty much every legislative session from here until we work through this horrific scourge, because it's just been so damaging to Oregon. We had drug tourism, people just coming here just to do drugs because no penalty.
Correct.
And we had just lots of reports of that. And Oregonians got tired of it. And one of the most damaging things I think about this whole thing was kids appeared to believe that because personal possession, decriminalization had happened, that it was okay and it was, quote, legal. And it wasn't okay, and it really wasn't legal. It was just, I think, a message that our youth didn't understand. And so they took it to mean, we can go ahead and do these drugs. And so you saw quite a few teenagers who either thought they were taking some other drug, because lots of drugs now, hard drugs, cocaine, heroin, you name it, is laced with fentanyl. And the really horrific thing about it is fentanyl is cheap, so less than $1 a dose. It's really easy to get, and it's really easy to move around. In other words, transport that drug. And so law enforcement was having a very tough time with some of the other court cases that had happened that didn't allow them to search and seize like they needed to when they saw these open-air drug sales and this open-air drug use happening. And so now through House Bill 4002 in the 24 session and some other legislation, they're going to be able to do what they need to do to control the situation. And so we're obviously, the legislature is going to monitor this, and they're going to evaluate how it's working and what county, because individual counties can set up their own system. And hopefully they'll work with each other to get the best system, get it right, and really make some gains on what turned out to be just a horrific experiment that cost thousands of Oregonians their lives. And I think most Oregonians would say, yeah, I know a family, or their family was touched by this tragedy. And so that's what changes minds, when people see the pain, the agony, the death, the destruction, and the danger that happened with what went on. And so the legislature wanted to respond in a way that validated the concerns of everybody who had gone through that pain. And so I feel good about the path that we got on to recriminalize and try to make the hope and the dream of treatment for your friends and family a reality.
Yeah, and so, one of the things that I did not vote for Measure 110, as somebody with lived experience, there's never any way that you're going to convince me that possession of narcotics and personal use is a good thing, like you said. You're never going to convince me that we have the infrastructure as some of the places overseas that they do. They did things way different, they invested over a long period of time, education, as well as infrastructure in order to roll out what they chose to do. We're nowhere near that. And I honestly pray that we never get there because, again, I'm just not a fan of it. But when you do look at Measure 110, and there is some positive, and I've tried really hard to take a look at some of the positive things that did come out of that, and that is, as you mentioned, the $288 million. With Oregon being rated 50th in the nation with access to drug treatment services. That $288 million really opened up a pathway to start to build the infrastructure that we need in order to offer the treatment services that are needed. It really helped grow some things and helped open up some other agencies, to help with the need of that. So I am thankful for the $288 million. When we had Ron on, one of the statements that I made to him, I've known Ron for many years. We're friends. We have different point of views, but we're still friends. And so I enjoy that banter and conversation with him because we don't see eye to eye. However, we are respectful of one another and, allow each other to share and voice their opinions. One of the things that I shared was, we never had to decriminalize to put to use the $288 million. So it would have been really cool to not have that part in there and opened up access to treatment services. And then with House Bill 4002, as you know, you were there when I testified on, in favor of recriminalization. I actually asked for more than what we ended up with as far as punitive sides of things. Because when you have freedom, ultimately freedom to run wild, it's hard to change direction. And so sometimes in order to change directions, when a ship starts going a certain way, you need a bigger rudder to change. And so when you have the freedom to, which really there wasn't freedom because there was still possible punishment. However, it was just $100 ticket, which is not big enough punishment. I've been sent and incarcerated a whole bunch of times because of drugs and illegal activity, and that never stopped me. It does stop some people. It does. Scare them with taking them to county jail, and that's it. They change everything about their lives. But for the majority, that's not the case. And so in order to go from what we had to what needs to take place, we needed some sort of help in change of direction, right? Which we needed. And another thing I don't think that the public understood was we tied the hands of law enforcement. I would hear people, as you know, I was a part of the original LEAD program here in Marion County, and we tied the hands of law enforcement to do what we as the general public desire to keep us safe, right? By voting in that ballot measure, we tied their hands, which was a huge injustice. And so with what, the legislation, your guys' offices, as well as with the district attorneys, the Association of District Attorneys, the Chief of Police, and the Sheriff's Association, coming up with what we have today, and people like Jared Murray from up in Portland, and Tony Vesna, and many, many other people, and Oregon Recovers, and all of these organizations that have really fought hard to make policy change. We end up with House Bill 4002, and it has given law enforcement the availability and capability to pursue people that are just shooting drugs or smoking drugs or selling drugs, all of those things that you described. So I'm really happy that we have that. I don't want to see the hundreds of millions of dollars that went into helping treatment agencies go away. There's a lot of agencies that use that money to build an infrastructure that if we were to take that away, that infrastructure would collapse. Yep. And then we're going backwards, not forward. And so I think that that's another key element that the public needs to understand, is that just because we have House Bill 4002, which is amazing, we still need the financial component there, right? Which does come from the marijuana taxation, which is Measure 110 funding, in order to keep the infrastructure so that we can keep the availability going, which is just a huge piece, right? So I'm really thankful to hear from you, as you're basically the inside track, right? Like you're dealing with this stuff and your colleagues are dealing with this stuff on a daily basis. Another thing that, is interesting, which is also brought up in what you were saying, is our homelessness, right? Our unsheltered, unhoused population is not, it is doing nothing but grow, right? I've been a part of some organizations that, are a part of doing street outreach on a daily basis. And I know during my time, my tenure with like Be Bold Street Ministries, out doing street outreach, we were meeting new people every day with stories that back your drug tourism comment, that would literally had told us, like, we came because we can do drugs and now we're just here, and it's like, this is crazy, So what if anything is going on to help Oregon in that aspect? I know our governor, continues to attempt and try to put out different things behind, trying to deal with that, but what can we expect?
Well, so there's a few things I think that are important for people to know. And through this process of a lot of people say legalization, really decriminalization. What happened is it gave cartels a significant foothold in Oregon. And there are now 5 of the biggest cartels, drug cartels, are now operating and solidified in Oregon because of it. Because it was so much easier for them to transport, deal, and do, get customers, because they had a built-in customer base, and people were continuing to come, and that's why you saw homelessness increase rapidly, overdose deaths increase rapidly. And so what we are going to need is continued future investment in the treatment and support for law enforcement in order for them to get control of the problem. Because what we really needed is for law enforcement to engage and re-engage. And they disengaged because they couldn't really do anything other than put themselves at risk when they were trying to deal with people who believed they essentially had immunity, from prosecution. And so they would just do whatever they wanted to do and basically taunt law enforcement to do anything about it. And it became a very dangerous situation. And so...
$100 ticket, and the possibility of bodily harm?
Yeah.
No way. I wouldn't do it.
Well, police officers, after they started down that road, realized that, first of all, nobody's calling the hotline to get drug treatment. And you look back on it and you thought, you think, so who thought it was a good idea to rely on a drug user who's doing 10 to 20 hits a day of fentanyl, right, to, when they get their ticket, go, all of a sudden they make 20 bad choices a day doing drugs, and then all of a sudden they're going to call a hotline to make a good decision? I don't think somehow the logic works. And it didn't, because less than 1% of people who were issued those tickets, and those tickets waned over time. There could have been thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of those tickets, and law enforcement just really stopped writing them after a few thousand, and we could see what the result was, and it was unmitigated disaster is what it was. And so the difference now is that law enforcement has some teeth and some operating room to be able to go and do what they need to do to re-engage, to keep the public safe. And it's all about, to me, it's all about saving lives and giving people the opportunity to turn their life around. And we should do that. I mean, that is compassion. Compassion is not, we're going to let you do drugs, sleep on the street, and ultimately die of overdose. One of the most compelling pieces of testimony that I heard back in early spring was from a guy named Rick Trelevin. And Rick testified, and he said, so basically what happened is fentanyl, which is dangerous and deadly, was a game changer in terms of drugs, not just in Oregon, but all around the country and around the world. Now, the biggest purveyor is China through Mexico. And I went down to the border earlier this year, and so it was Arizona, California, Mexico border. And they were telling us that 50% of all the fentanyl that comes into the United States comes through basically through Arizona in the Yuma sector. And that's just incredible. And so when people talk about the loose border that we have, you can connect it right to Oregon's drug problem and fentanyl that is killing Oregonians at a really rapid rate. And now we hear there's another fentanyl type product that's 100 times stronger than fentanyl. And just a little grain of fentanyl can kill you. So, we need to get control of this problem for our kids and for our grandkids. Some of us are older.
I have my first grandkid coming
awesome.
Next month.
Awesome.
January 6th is when she's due.
Well, I have a grandson who's going to be born in January as well, and that'll be my fourth. So,
yeah, I'm super excited. My wife and I are just spending money like it's going out of style because we've got a grandbaby coming.
Absolutely. And we want to give those kids an opportunity to live a life that's free of that scourge, because it's going to do nothing but destroy your life. It might feel good for the moment, but there's a price to pay. And we heard from so many parents who lost their teenagers to fentanyl overdose, and it's the saddest thing that you could possibly hear, and the most painful thing a parent can go through is losing a child. And most of the parents had no idea what was happening, and that they had said goodbye to their child for the last time.
Yeah.
And we can't have Oregon be that. Oregon needs to be a place of hope. We have an incredible state, and we have incredible people, and they deserve better than a really bad policy that was probably never going to work, and certainly not going to work well, and was so damaging. And so you're going to see over time the modifications of Measure 110 that the public will support, the changes they'll support. And thankfully, Measure 110 was passed as a statute as opposed to a constitutional amendment, because we wouldn't have been able to modify it otherwise. And so thankfully, the legislature got together in a bipartisan way. I will give I'm a Republican, I will give my Democrat colleagues their due as they ultimately came to a bipartisan agreement. We, like you, who were aligned with law enforcement, wanted
because I'm a Republican too.
It's just, I think people that understand that there has to be a consequence for, behavior that is going to be damaging to yourself and the public and your family, and the penalty has to be enough for people to make the right reaction. The reaction we want is, if you're using drugs, we want you to choose treatment. Yeah. And we don't want to put you in jail. There's really no benefit to putting somebody who's on drugs in jail. And I mean, as you know, there's a fair amount of drug use in jail.
Yeah, I had quite the operation going in there.
So, yes, I mean, so we don't believe that jail is the answer for people, but at the same time, if you're going to continue to damage yourself, your family, your community, and ultimately kill yourself. And so, like what Rick Treleaven said was that most of these people who ultimately overdose have probably 15 episodes of overdose before they die. And each one of those episodes is like a traumatic brain injury, every single one of them. And it just compounds after each one. So you get Narcan or whatever it is that they're going to use to try to bring you out of your drug-induced stupor, and ultimately, if you don't get that type of treatment, that you could very well die. And so that's permanent and lasting, essentially brain damage that's going on with every single overdose that happens. And obviously we save some people, but are they going to be the same? Are they going to be able to be positive members of society? And so that's what changed the game, was fentanyl coming on the scene and just mowing people down. We always had long-term marijuana users. We always had long-term heroin users, still dangerous, but they were out there. Long-term cocaine users. There are no long-term fentanyl users because they die. They kill themselves, mostly unintentionally, but they die from overdose, and by the thousands.
Yeah.
And it's just, it just wasn't okay. And so, I think it's something where Oregonians can be proud that their law, their people who represent them, the legislature, listened to them and reacted. And that's where I give my Democratic colleagues some kudos that they were willing to work with us to try to come up with a solution. Because initially, I think they really didn't want to make the change to it, because there was some element that always says, well, if the people passed it, we're not going to touch it. Well, people didn't understand what it was actually going to do, and then the result was so much different than what was advertised.
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine if they told you in the commercials that, people that you know are going to die if we pass this measure, because they're going to believe that it's okay because it's
legal,
decriminalized, right? And bodies are going to stack up like cordwood. I'm pretty sure people would go, I don't think I'm going to vote for that.
Right.
But that's the truth of what happened.
Yep.
That wasn't what the advertising was. It was all sweetness and light about how people are going to get treatment. It's all going to be good, and the world's going to be so much of a better place. And it got so much worse.
Yes.
And so, so thankful for you and others who were out there who were able to, put some truth to this, and who are out there doing this work every day and working with people who have been affected by it.
Yeah. Yeah, and even making the statement, of my political stance, I have been able to work with both sides, and was impressed with both sides listening, right? Because it wasn't just one-sided, because as you said, it was a bipartisan agreement to make the change, right? Almost unanimously. There was a few that wanted to stand, but for the most part, everybody was behind it. And again, kudos to the governor, because even before, she put into effect the uptick on penalization for fentanyl distribution, and put that into law prior to the House bill passing, right? So even in that, like, she did some pretty cool things to help out with law enforcement and prosecution of those crimes. And I'm interested to see what House Bill 4002 does to our homeless population, right? With individuals, it no longer being, again, it was never really completely legal, but it was. What that does in that change. And, you know, with that, like, what would you recommend as, you know, you're heading out of office, and we're getting ready to go into long session. So as we head into long session, there's going to be lots of new ballot measures. There's going to be lots of new things that are coming across, you know, to get passed. For the overarching general public, what recommendation or advice could you give on how to navigate through what is what, right? Because obviously, money allows people to spin the narrative the way that they desire. So knowing that, and I think that most people have a great understanding that you can turn on Fox or CNN or CBS and get 3 different stories around the same story. So what do we do as we hear about these ballot measures and these different things? What can we do to better educate ourselves before we check the box and end up in the craziness that we've had?
Yeah, so it's really hard because members of the general public are out there and they are trying to put food on the table for their kids, trying to get their kids to school, trying to pay the rent or the mortgage, you know, working lots of times, not one job, but 2 or 3 to make ends meet, right? And so they don't really have time to invest in watching everything that the legislature does. And so they hire people to represent them. And those people need to understand. So people who get into office lots of times think they have power. Well, they don't have power. God has power. What they have is influence. And they need to use that influence to have a positive impact on the lives of the people that they represent. And they need to do that every day and every way on every bill. And there's this poll of their supporters who come up with some of these ideas aren't really good. And the hardest thing you can do is say no to your friends who just got you elected to the legislature and want you to do what they want. And so use that influence for good and work in a bipartisan way, a truly bipartisan way. You know, include the other party in discussions, you know, learn what their concerns are. In the case of this particular issue, you had all of law enforcement aligned. So you had the DAs, you had the rank and file, law enforcement, city, county, state police, federal, all of them saying, you got a serious problem, got to be fixed, got to recriminalize. And as you said, there were some people who just didn't want to make that change.
Right.
And they were happy to just let it ride. I'm like, I'm not. I can't do that. I can't just look the other way and go, well, Oregonians made a mistake and they're just going to have to pay for it. That's the wrong answer. Yeah. The influence that you have is to say, they weren't told the truth. We're going to find the truth, and then we're going to go legislate it and make things better. Because ultimately, I think that's your job, is to represent people who really don't have much of a voice. And, you know, that tends to be poor people, people of color, you know, people who are newer to the U.S., you know, the working poor, essentially. They don't have much of a voice. And so, and kids, you know, especially little children, they have no voice at all. And so we should be their voice. And we should do what helps them and protects them and gives them the opportunities that this country was built around. And I believe that opportunity is there for people today, but they need to live long enough to be able to, you know, to exercise those opportunities and make good decisions for themselves.
Yeah, so when it comes to people being able to reach out to the people that they voted for and helped put in office. What is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, right. Well, the best way is to have a relationship with that legislator before they go off to legislate. So maybe you know the person that you voted for, maybe you don't. But I would encourage you to take an hour, go to a town hall, introduce yourself to that legislator, let them know that you're a constituent, let them know what your concerns are. And if you can't do that, send an email. We get lots of email, but that's probably the most effective way to communicate. Phone calls are not great unless you have their cell phone and can text them or call them. So if you know them, do that. If you don't, I wouldn't call the switchboard. I mean, do people tally calls about certain issues? Sure. But it's just not that effective of a way to communicate. Because if you send an email, make it short, get to the point, tell them what you believe, be courteous. Nobody responds well to people who threaten you or use profanity or whatever. Not a great idea. Just be cordial and say, hey, I'm your constituent and I care about this issue, and I think you should do X, Y, Z to change things. So, to be engaged, be a voice. Don't just rely on others to be that voice for you, because there are plenty of paid voices called lobbyists, and some of them are do-gooders, and some of them you would not appreciate very much. Because they don't align with you. Yeah. And so they're there paid every day to influence legislators in a way that you don't like.
And it's crazy. I've been there on some of the lobby days because being a part of Oregon Recovers, I've been a board member for a while. So we have a big day where we go out and have a big rally in front of the Capitol and then spend time with different senators and people from the House, representatives and all that stuff. And it's like a Shark's Tank. I've watched you guys walk out of your offices just trying to go to the bathroom, and then 3 lobbyists are right there, wanting to get time and just be able to say a few words and all this stuff. And it's holy smokes. Yeah. And some of them, you're right. The things that I've heard, I'm like, oh wow, I hope that doesn't happen, And so that's that's funny. It is like a Shark Tank, and they're all in there in their laptops, out there working and doing that stuff, and they're just waiting for that moment to.
Yeah, well, that was the scene today. We had Legislative Days, which is a 3-day quarterly event when the legislature is out of session, and we're ramping up for the next session. And so we have Legislative Days, which is basically committee hearings. Most of them are informational hearings, but bills were introduced today, and lots of lobby was in the building, lots of groups were in the building. And if you've ever been to State Capitol, and I would encourage you at some point, if you've never been, to come to the State Capitol. I would say come later in the session next year, late spring, because it'll be mostly remodeled by then. Right now it's kind of a mess. But you'll find that besides the rotunda, there's this hallway just right on the other side of the rotunda where most of the committee hearing rooms are. And it's like running the gauntlet. And so when you have to walk to your committees, that's when all the lobby groups and all the lobbyists are, stopping you and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this and like to talk to you about that. And there's lots of people there that want to raise your taxes and want to take your freedom and want to tell you how you're going to live your life. And I think we should preserve as much freedom to the people as we possibly can. And there are people that want to tell you, what you can eat, where you can go to church, when you can go to church, what job you can have, and what did we see during COVID? That's exactly what we saw. Is the government stepping in and saying, "Oh, we're gonna regulate you because we know best." And what did we find out? Well, we found out that large businesses operated, small businesses were closed, and ultimately a lot of them went out of business because they just couldn't. Operate. What did that do to restaurants? Again, lots of small businesses kind of wiped them out. And so we need voices of reason and sanity in that place. And so to the degree that you can engage, I would encourage you to do that, because we are a representative republic. and your representative should be reflecting your viewpoints, and so you should give it to them.
Awesome. Well, I want to say, thank you for 18 years of service to our state. I know the last few years of getting to know you and meeting with you has been, a blessing to me. You've always been really receptive to meet with me. We've had breakfast together, and we've met multiple times, and so just want to say thank you so much. I had no idea that you were going out of office, and so to hear that, it's kind of a shocker, because you have really helped a lot of good things happen, and so I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here and giving us some of your insights on different matters, and again, just thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, and we'll look forward to a good 25 legislative session.
Yes, sir.